The flickering neon sign of Rosie's Diner cast elongated, distorted shadows down the rain-slicked alleyway. It was a place where the city's underbelly festered, a narrow chasm between brick buildings choked with overflowing dumpsters and the stench of decay. Elias, a down-on-his-luck private investigator, found himself drawn into its depths, following a trail of whispered rumors and the desperate plea of a woman named Clara. Clara's brother Marco had vanished. Not just disappeared, but evaporated, leaving behind only a chilling absence and a single, frantic voicemail. The shadow. It took him. In the alley. Elias, hardened by years of dealing with the city's grime, initially dismissed it as drug-induced paranoia. But the raw terror in Clara's voice, the way she clutched a worn locket as if it were a lifeline, chipped away at his cynicism. He agreed to investigate, though a gnawing unease settled in his gut. The alley was a labyrinth of darkness, even the meager light from Rosie's sign struggling to penetrate its depths. Each step echoed with an unnerving resonance, amplified by the slick cobblestones. The air was thick with a cloying, metallic scent that made Elias's nostrils burn. He found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, a primal instinct screaming that he was being watched. He found Marco's discarded wallet near a rusted fire escape, its contents scattered. A crumpled photo of Marco and Clara, smiling and carefree, lay face down in a puddle. As Elias picked it up, a cold gust of wind swept through the alley, extinguishing the faint light from the diner. The darkness became absolute, a suffocating blanket that pressed against his skin. A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the alley. It wasn't an animal. It was something deeper, something ancient and malevolent. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers trembling. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a swirling, amorphous shadow clinging to the brick wall. It writhed and pulsed, its edges blurring and distorting like smoke in a windstorm. It was a shadow that didn't belong, a darkness that seemed to consume the already dim light. Then, it moved. It slithered from the wall, a fluid, undulating mass that flowed towards Elias. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The shadow stretched and elongated, forming a vaguely humanoid shape, its features indiscernible, a void within a void. A wave of intense cold washed over Elias, a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep into his very marrow. He felt a crushing pressure on his chest, as if the darkness itself were trying to suffocate him. The growl intensified, a rasping, inhuman sound that vibrated through his bones. He raised his flashlight, the beam trembling in his grip. The shadow recoiled slightly, as if the light were anathema to it. Elias realized with a sickening jolt that the shadow wasn't just a lack of light. It was a predator, a creature that thrived in darkness, feeding on fear. He remembered Clara's locket, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. He pulled it from his pocket, the cool metal a stark contrast to the clammy sweat on his palm. As he held it aloft, the shadow hissed, a sound like air escaping a punctured lung. The locket shimmered, reflecting the faint light from the diner. The shadow recoiled further, its form flickering and distorting. It seemed to be recoiling from the reflected light. Elias, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, pressed forward, the locket held out like a weapon. He shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "What are you? What do you want?" The shadow responded with a sound that was not a word, but a psychic scream, a wave of pure terror that slammed into Elias's mind. He saw flashes of grotesque images, of twisted figures and endless darkness, of a hunger that could never be satisfied. He almost collapsed, his mind reeling from the onslaught. But he held onto the locket, its cool surface grounding him. He remembered Clara's words. It feeds on fear. He forced himself to breathe, to control the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on the locket, on the faint light it reflected. He pushed back against the terror, refusing to succumb. The shadow, sensing his resistance, lashed out. It lunged towards him, its form stretching and distorting, reaching out with tendrils of darkness. Elias felt a searing pain as one of the tendrils brushed his arm, leaving a burning, icy mark. He stumbled back, his flashlight falling to the ground, plunging him into near-total darkness. The shadow was upon him, its cold, suffocating presence pressing against him. He could feel its hunger, its desire to consume him, to drag him into the abyss. He closed his eyes, focusing on the image of the locket, on the faint light it held. He remembered Clara's desperate plea, her hope that he could find her brother. He wouldn't let her down. He opened his eyes, his gaze locked on the shadow. He spoke, his voice low and steady. "You can't have me. I'm not afraid." The shadow hesitated, its form wavering. It seemed to sense a shift in Elias, a flicker of defiance in the face of overwhelming terror. He raised the locket, the silver reflecting the faint light from the diner. He spoke again, his voice gaining strength. "You feed on fear, but I won't give you any. I won't let you take anyone else." The shadow hissed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. It lunged again, its tendrils reaching for him, its form a swirling vortex of darkness. Elias braced himself, ready to face the darkness, to fight for his life. But then, something unexpected happened. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from the locket, a soft, pulsating light that spread through the alley. The shadow recoiled, its form shrinking and distorting. It hissed and writhed, as if in agony. The light from the locket intensified, pushing back the darkness, forcing the shadow to retreat. It slithered back towards the wall, its form dissolving into the shadows, its growls fading into a low, mournful whine. Then, it was gone. The alley was silent, the only sound the gentle patter of rain. The oppressive cold had lifted, replaced by a sense of profound relief. Elias, his body trembling, his mind reeling, collapsed against the brick wall. He looked at the locket, its ethereal glow fading, its surface now dull and lifeless. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the shadow wasn't gone forever. It was merely wounded, forced to retreat. It would return, stronger and more vengeful, seeking to consume the fear that lingered in the darkness. He found Marco's body hidden behind a rusted dumpster, his face contorted in a mask of terror, his eyes wide and vacant. There was no physical wound, but his life force had been drained, consumed by the shadow. Elias returned the locket to Clara, his voice heavy with grief. He told her what he had seen, what he had faced. She wept, but there was a strange sense of peace in her eyes, a knowledge that her brother was finally at rest. He left the city. The memory of the shadow burned into his mind. He knew he couldn't escape it, that the darkness was a part of him now, a constant reminder of the evil that lurked in the shadows. He carried the fear with him, a heavy burden that weighed on his soul. But he also carried a flicker of hope, a belief that even in the darkest of places, light could prevail, that even in the face of overwhelming terror, courage could be found. He knew he would face the shadow again, that their paths were intertwined, bound by the darkness that lurked in the alleys of the city. He would be ready, armed with the knowledge that fear was a weapon, and that courage was the only shield against the darkness that sought to consume them all. And he knew that the shadow always returns. It started with the cat. Every night around 2:43 a.m., Eleanor Whitaker's tabby would begin to hiss at the back door. Not just a typical hiss, this was primal, drawn from somewhere ancient and wild. She lived alone in a narrow townhouse that pressed against the edge of Croft Alley, one of the oldest and most forgotten corners of Harrow End. The alley was narrow, barely enough for a person to walk through, and always damp, even in the summer. It twisted like a scar between buildings, shrouded in shadows even at high noon. Locals called it the breathing lane, because, according to legend, the alley exhaled when no one was around. Eleanor had never believed the stories. Until now. The first night the hissing started, she thought it was a raccoon, or maybe a possum. But when she opened the door to investigate, there was nothing there. just the quiet darkness of Croft Alley and the faint cold stench of rot. She began to hear the whispers the following week. They didn't come from the alley itself, but from the walls of her home. Soft, sliding voices like silk on flesh. Sometimes they called her name. Sometimes they wept. Sometimes they laughed. She told herself it was the pipes. Old homes groaned after all. But the voices had tone, inflection, emotion. One night, the whispering stopped. The cat was quiet. Eleanor slept deeply without dreams. Until 2:43 a.m. when a soft knock echoed from the back door. Knock, knock, knock. She sat up instantly, heart pounding. The cat crouched at the foot of the bed, ears flat, tail thrashing. Her alarm clock flashed red. 2:43. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She crept down the stairs, each step creaking like a scream in the silence. At the foot of the stairs, the air was different, thicker, as if she'd stepped into a swamp. She reached the kitchen, hesitated, then drew back the curtain above the sink. Nothing. Just the alley. She turned on the porch light and saw it. A figure stood in the alley, just beyond the reach of the light. Not a person. Not really. Its shape was human, but wrong. Too tall. Limbs like stretched shadows. Featureless. No face. No eyes. Just a silhouette in the dark. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply watched. Then it raised one long, crooked finger and pointed at her. Eleanor stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. She scrambled for her phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator picked up, but Eleanor couldn't form words. Just breathy sobs. When she finally choked out her address, the operator asked the usual questions. Are you in immediate danger? Is the intruder armed? She looked again. The figure was gone. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. They suggested she install a security camera. She did. The next night, she waited. The camera feed open on her phone, live. At 2:43 a.m., the shadow returned. It stood in exactly the same place, just at the edge of the light. She didn't open the door this time, didn't look directly at it. She just watched the camera. And this time, the shadow moved. It leaned forward, like a puppet on broken strings, and placed one long hand against the wall of her house. Then it turned, and vanished into the alley. When she played back the recording, her screen went static the moment the shadow appeared. The footage returned only after it was gone. The cops didn't believe her. Some glitch, they said. You sure it wasn't a nightmare? They asked. But the visits continued, always at 2:43, always from the alley. One night, Eleanor left her bedroom window open. Just a crack. Just enough to listen. What she heard wasn't a shadow. It was breathing. Raspy, wet, and hungry. The legend of Croft Alley goes back to 1892. Back then, it was the site of the Harrow End Asylum, a grim stone building filled with society's unwanted, madmen, orphans, the sick and forgotten. The asylum burned to the ground in the winter of 1893, taking 37 souls with it. No one knew how the fire started. Survivors spoke of a thing that lived in the alley, something that whispered to the patients, offering them escape. One nurse claimed she saw a black angel with no eyes pull open the walls before the flames consumed everything. The alley remained. The stories remained. And now, Eleanor was part of them. On the 19th night, Eleanor did something she hadn't done since childhood. She prayed. Not to God exactly. She didn't know what she was praying to. Just something stronger than whatever waited outside. But when she closed her eyes, she dreamed of the alley. And in the dream, the walls bled. The bricks opened like mouths, and the shadow crawled from the cracks like ink spilling in water. When she woke, she found muddy footprints in her hallway. She didn't even own boots. Desperation has a sound. For Eleanor, it was the sound of silence, the unbearable kind. The kind that presses against your eardrums and whispers, You're alone. She drove to the local library and dove into old records, flipping through brittle pages until her fingers bled from the paper cuts. That's when she found the journal. It belonged to a man named Thomas Bell, a doctor at the asylum. His entries started normal. Patient reports, routine concerns. Then something changed. March 5th, 1893. There is something in the alley. I've seen it twice now. Not directly, but enough to know it sees me. One of the patients, Ward 12, refuses to sleep. Says the shadow wants inside. Yesterday, she tore out her own eyes to unsee it. March 19th, 1893. I heard it whisper to me. It said my name in a voice that wasn't a voice. The air grew cold. I think it's feeding off us. I think it's learning. March 26th, 1893. I sealed the east wing, bricked it over, but I still hear it breathing in the walls. We are not alone here. We were never alone. The journal ended abruptly. No death certificate for Thomas Bell. No records at all. Eleanor returned home that night and found every mirror in her house shattered. Except one. The mirror in her bedroom. In it, she could see the alley behind her. But when she turned to look, the alley was empty. In the reflection, however, the shadow was standing right behind her. She ran. Out the front door. Into the night. She didn't stop until she reached the church at the edge of town, St. Maro's Chapel, long abandoned but still standing. She broke inside, the wooden door splintering beneath her fists. The stained glass wept moonlight onto dust-covered pews. She collapsed at the altar and whispered, "Please. Make it stop. I'll do anything." And something answered. Not with words, but with silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest like a hand. When she returned home the next morning, all was still. No shadows, no whispers. The cat purred and napped on the windowsill. The clock read 2:43 p.m. That night she slept, deeply, peacefully, until 2:43 a.m., when the back door creaked open. She hadn't unlocked it. The cat yowled in terror and vanished under the bed. Eleanor sat up, heart frozen. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Slow, heavy. A shape moved in the dark hallway outside her room. Then a voice, not a whisper this time, but a voice, rasped, "You said you'd do anything." She screamed as the door burst open. They found her the next day. The neighbors had called after hearing screams. The door was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. Eleanor was gone, but the walls were smeared with long black handprints. And in the alley beneath the porch light, the camera recorded one final frame before the static returned. A shadow, tall and crooked, staring up at the lens, and smiling.